I wanted to come. I was invited to come speak to you guys today about what's going to go on next legislative session. I think Chantel's going to, if she hasn't already, she already did, pass out some what I've termed kind of our legislative preview. And it's not everything we know we're going to see, but these are the four of the big things that we're going to be working on, two of which Carr is somewhat spearheading, another of which obviously we've been part of a coalition now for the last 3 years on, which is construction defects reform. And then I'm going to talk just briefly about one or two other issues that have just popped up recently, neither good nor bad necessarily. And then finish it up with a little talk on this affordable housing package that the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, and the Senate the Senate Majority Leader would like to introduce this year, and how that might affect some of the bills that I'm going to discuss. The first bill I want to cover is a first-time homebuyer savings account. This is something that past CARD Chairman David Barber put together, what we call a PAG, or I guess a CAG now, which is a Presidential Advisory Group. And they saw in other states, namely Virginia, more recently Virginia, Montana, Connecticut, Iowa, and Georgia are going through the process, somewhere in the process legislatively. But they met and they talked about, and some states have already put this into policy, but creating a first-time homebuyer savings account. So not that tax credit that we saw back in, was that 8 to 10 or 11, back in kind of in the doldrums from the federal government. But these are state savings accounts that will give you a tax advantage with your state income tax. So this one, as we've kind of contemplated it so far, and it's in drafting right now, actually just received the second draft yesterday, would be something that allows either a grandparent, a parent, or the actual potential first-time home buyer to designate an account at a bank and say, I want all money to go into this savings account designated for a first-time home buyer. That could be for anything you commonly find on the settlement statement. So not just a down payment. It can be closing costs. It can be appraisals, inspections, that type of thing. How we have it currently is capped at $50,000 of contributions. There will probably be an annual cap. We have not gone there yet. Our next step, after we talk to the bill sponsor, who's going to most likely be Majority Leader Duran in the House and hopefully Senate President Scheffel in the Senate. So we're starting off with two pretty darn good bill sponsors there, but we need to get a fiscal analysis done about what kind of fiscal impact this has. I'm sure you guys have read through in the papers that we're getting these TABOR refunds, yet we're $200 or $200 million or $280 million, whatever, depends on whose revenue forecast you're looking at in the hole, or we've got a deficit in Colorado. So we've got a little bit of that to counteract as well. But likely it's going to be $50,000, capped to $50,000, and the account would be allowed to grow to $150,000. So interest, that type of thing. And the point being there would be that any contributions in would be a deduction in your state income tax. Any growth on that fund would then remain untaxed as long as it's used for qualified expenses, i.e. anything commonly found on a settlement statement. So think College 529 plans that you probably set up for your children, maybe your grandchildren. It's not identical to that. It's not a facsimile of a 529 plan, but that is kind of where we got the idea, as well as these other states that have put this into place. So there would be one carve out for active duty military, that if they were, if they're active duty, they were sent to another state, they were stationed in another state, they could buy that, they could use that money to purchase a home in another state and not be penalized for it. Of course, just like a 529 plan, if you do use any of the proceeds of this fund for anything that's a non-qualifying expense, you would be hit with a tax recapture and a penalty. We don't know what that penalty be yet. We hope it'll be somewhere around 5%, not have to be any greater than that. But that's the first-time homebuyer savings account. Again, in drafting, I'm going to speak a little bit later how this may be put into a package of bills to address affordable housing. The other related issue trying to get homeowners, first-time homebuyers into product is construction defects reform. Peter has done a great job here with your Government Affairs Committee, with Jason Peck, in helping our Homeownership Opportunity Alliance that we have at the state level to go around to these 9, I think now 10 in Colorado Springs, will either be the 10th or 11th municipality that have acted in the vacuum left by the legislature. They're in action, actually, on construction defects reform. This year, the coalition is going to come back with another bill. Likely what we're going to see is that we're going to parse out, we're going to separate the bill from last year. So the bill from last year required notice to unit owners prior to litigation. It required informed consent of a simple majority of unit owners before you can enter into litigation. And it also talked about alternative dispute resolution or mediation as the primary means of resolving the disputes. What we believe we're going to do, because there's so much heartache over the ADR mediation piece, is split out the notice and the consent pieces as a standalone bill and have the ADR piece be its own bill. The other reason we're doing that too is some of you may be aware, a day after the session ended last year, or I guess earlier this spring, the Colorado Court of Appeals handed down a decision in what we're calling the Villaggio case. That basically got us where we wanted to be on ADR. It basically said that unit owners don't have the ability to just necessarily amend their declarations to remove alternative dispute resolution out of them so that they can go sue the developers and the builders and the architects and the subcontractors and everybody else that they want to do. So that this year, I believe, and that ADR piece again gives the biggest heartache to the Speaker of the House, who obviously we have to please because she determines where the bill goes to committee once it hits the House. We have ongoing discussions, obviously, with stakeholders on the other side, our opposition, as well as with the leadership in the House. But right now, as a coalition, that's what we believe is the best path forward. Yeah, oh yeah, and Denver kind of took a little bit from what we were doing at the state. Yeah, believe me, we're looking at all. I mean, if you see, Lakewood was the first to do this, as we all probably know. Littleton's been a little bit different. Denver's has actually been a lot different. Not a lot different, but it's been a lot more different than the preceding 6 or 7 that passed ahead of them. I don't know if we'll go all the way to what Denver did. Denver talked a little bit more about, and I don't actually know that one as well as I did at the state level, but that talks about the building codes, and if it's up to code and can't be part of the lawsuit. I don't know if we'll do that. I think we'll probably start with where we are, where we got the most, made the most progress last year. And as some of you guys that may follow the legislature know, this was the 3rd year we tried such a thing. The first year, it died in committee. The second year, it made it out of committee. The 3rd year, we got it through the Senate. So we are making progress. We're hoping that all of the local efforts that have happened around now the state, because Colorado Springs, but primarily the metro area, will actually put some needed pressure on the state, on the legislature themselves, and say, we actually need a statewide solution here. We need everybody to have certainty and be operating under the same rules, regardless of the address. So that's what we're doing on construction defects. Any other questions on there before I move from that? And again, I'll take questions at the end. So again, that's the status right now. We don't have anything, well, nothing will be introduced until the session convenes in January, but we're having those 2 types of bills drafted right now. The third thing, another rehash from last year, is home inspector licensing. Up until last week, we weren't sure if it was going to come back. We talked to the sponsor from last year, Senator Nancy Todd out in Aurora. She does want to run it again. I think we've found some good common ground with some of the home inspector groups. We still need to talk to 2 of the other professional organizations among the home inspectors again. And that's really because we were all pretty copacetic last year as the bill was introduced, but then the Division of Professions and Occupations came in and said, well, if you want us to be the regulator, we need to change the bill, and these 6, 7, it turned out to be like 15 to 20 ways. And they were somewhat small, but anyhow, that bill is being run back through the stakeholder process to make sure that everybody's still copacetic. But Senator Todd seems willing to run the bill again. She says she wants to. It'll probably be one of her later bill titles, so it'll be introduced later in the session. But likely that is something we'll see. It's something, as I go to speak to local boards and to brokerages, that I'm finding more and more people are always raising their hand asking what's going on with home inspector licensure, or sharing a horror story. The last thing I'll touch on that doesn't seem to affect you guys as much, but it really does when we talk about homeowners insurance around the state and that type of thing, and that's wildfire mitigation tax credit. Some of you may know that we started Colorado Project Wildfire. We launched that in late July this year, designed to bring resources and education to property owners that live among the wildland urban interface, or the WUI. And what we're doing on the legislative front is trying to bring more financial resources through tax policy to these property owners in the form of a wildfire mitigation tax credit. There is a current tax deduction, but we found that it's being rarely used, and I think it's because really it doesn't defray as many expenses as a tax credit would. So this would be a $2,500 tax credit for at least 25% of the cost of mitigation. A couple of the other little issues are TD1000s. Are you guys still transacting property with a lot of consideration paid for personal property? I know it happens a lot more in the mountain towns. When I go talk to Steamboat, they talk about it. Yes, it becomes an issue, especially with underwriting. It came out last year that the county clerks, or at least the counties, don't necessarily treat the consideration paid for personal property the same. Some deduct it from the sales price and then calculate the documentary fee. Some don't. We just want some clarity. So we're working with the title companies and the lenders and a lot of other, the Colorado Bar Association, on some way that we can make sure that everybody's acting from the same playbook, that clarifies how they need to be treating any consideration paid for personal property. CMLA, or the mortgage lenders, are going to introduce, but I've yet to see their draft, but it's going to be legislation to try to harmonize state statute with what some of the CFPB, or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I've only called them the CFPB for a while, with their regulations. So they're just going to try to harmonize it. I don't know, I'm not going to put Marcia on the spot, but within her mortgage loan originator board, there's some rules and regs and statutes in Colorado that no longer are in harmony with CFPB. The last thing I do want to talk about is the affordable housing package that I touched on at the beginning. The rumors are, what we know is going to be in it is the low-income housing tax credit. So this is something that CAR supported a few years ago. It's basically sunsetting. They would like to extend it out to at least 2019, which still isn't that much longer. It'll be 3 years once we're into 2016. But it's a tax credit that CHAFA primarily uses a lot, and they do working with their developers. And it's obviously designed to provide tax credits to developers that build affordable housing, both rental and for sale. There's also a move, and it happened last year, and I think it got kind of caught up in construction defects dying, but there was a move, which we also supported, that would kind of scrape some of the unclaimed property trust fund in Colorado and put some of that money and create the corpus of a fund for affordable housing, something that could be used for development of low-income housing, that type of thing. The other third thing that we think is going to be now will be the first-time homebuyer tax credit. So the majority leader who would like to sponsor the first-time homebuyer tax credit bill is kind of spearheading this with, again, the Senate president, who we hope to be our other sponsor, and they would like to see a package of that. And of course, within that package, some would like to see construction defects reform, because that's part of our argument. Is we're not talking about necessarily affordable housing in its traditional sense, but more housing affordability, right? A lot more diversity in the housing stock, i.e. condos that can be built in Colorado that first-time home buyers and even retirees want to get back into, especially around transit-oriented development stops. So likely we're going to see that package with hopefully two of which are going to be major priorities of ours. The only, I guess, concern with that is if you get into a fight between the caucuses, because the Republicans control the Senate, the Democrats hold the House, that some of these could be, held captive or become, victims, I guess, if one bill were to die over another. But I think right now it's a lot more promising than it is concerning that we're going to get a package of bills, and that the leaders in both caucuses look at two of our major priorities as ways forward to get that package done. So we're really hopeful that we'll have, this is a pretty pretty active year as far as initiating legislation for us. We've done this now 2 or 3 years in a row, and it's a lot harder, obviously, to initiate bills. It takes 6 more votes to get a bill passed and the governor's signature than it does, obviously, to have a defensive posture and kill a bill, which only takes 1 vote. The only other thing I wanted to cover at the top of this, you see, if you haven't responded to the call for action, that's the way you can do it. This is the NAR call for action on the G fees, the guarantee fees from Fannie and Freddie as part of the transportation funding. The other thing I wanted to just touch base on is I can't do my job well without the interface that I have with you guys, the practitioners, and where that primarily happens is our Legislative Policy Committee. And you guys have 3 to 4, I believe, this year on the Legislative Policy Committee, and Mark Trenka, who will be CAR's chairman next year, was our chair for the last 2 years. If you see one of your legislative policy members, hug them, give them a fist bump. They do a lot of work on your behalf, and they help my staff and our lobbyists so much on how policy affects you guys as practitioners in the state of Colorado. So they do really yeoman's work, and they dedicate a lot of time in the 120 days that we're in session from January to May. So thank them when you see them. They're an amazing boon to our association. That's all I have for you.